from, well, I'm gonna let you explain exactly where you're from,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
he works with the Wisconsin Innocence Project.
Cool.
So-
Great. Hi, everyone. It's so nice to be here with you all. My plan is to kind of move about, hit the space bar. So if I'm blocking your view, know that I won't be forever. But so excited to be here with you all. I'm Nick. I use they, them pronouns. I work. The reason Linda left the introduction to me is because I work at the University of Wisconsin's Law School, specifically within a clinic called the Remington Center. The Remington Center is an umbrella organization that houses many different projects, including the Wisconsin Innocence Project, which I'm here to talk to you all a little bit today about. It also houses a number of other really cool things that you all probably have touched on in your learning so far. So we house a restorative justice project that facilitates dialogues between survivors of crimes or their family members and the person held responsible. We also house just a general post-conviction clinic. We house the Innocence Project, Public Defender Project, a number of other things. And so if you have questions about any of that, would love to chit chat more about that soon. But thanks. I heard that there was one screen, so in lieu of like flashy slides, I went for readability.
All right.
I'm glad that landed well. But so here's just like a little bit of an outline of kind of where I anticipate our conversation going. If you all have other thoughts or want to get to stuff, for those in the back, it says Intro to Nick, Intro to WHIP, Incarceration in Wisconsin, which seems like you all have a lot of thoughts already on that. Recent successes with the Wisconsin Innocence Project, some challenges we're facing, and where maybe you all could fit into the puzzle with the Wisconsin Innocence Project. If there's other things that people are like, we definitely want to make sure we get to this, cool, I think we'll have time for that. So, also, general check-in, is my voice volume okay for people in the back?
Yep.
Sick.
Good.
Cool. Just wanted to make sure. So, as we're heading into this conversation, I just wanted to kind of set some like personal hopes and aspirations for the space. You're welcome to embrace these or just outright refuse them. That's fine. I don't have any authority over your lives, so feel free to be like, no, that's not for me. But so my assumptions about the space are that we can all contribute to this conversation. We all have different vantage points into the conversation, but contributions are helpful. I'm not the only like quote unquote experts in this conversation. You all have been embarking on this conversation. Some of you might have very real lived experiences with the criminal legal system, and that's more than I can say at this point. And so, yeah, you too are an expert in this combo. Don't let me become the like final arbiter of what's valid in this space. I wanted to specifically highlight that the criminal legal system impacts us all, but not in the same ways. Those are obviously things that are informed by a variety of our social identities, including like class, race, gender, etc. Embrace nuance. With that, I think I was just hoping for us to talk about how, in particular, dominant systems benefit from like a flattened understanding of prisons, the prison industrial complex, and just like life within prison. So let's embrace all of the different facets of all of that, and then aspiring for us to build community and to find opportunities to co-conspire for justice. I don't know that I have a finalized thought of what co-conspiring for justice looks like or means, but I'm hoping that maybe we can come to that conclusion together today. Are there other hopes that people had for this space that we should include at this point? No is great. If you're like, no, I have several hopes, that's great.
Here's except these people usually sit in the front, and so now they have to sit in the back.
Drama.
I tease them about that every
Yeah.
time. They're good sports.
No, this may or may not surprise you based off of how you know me so far, but I have like a specific spot that I like to sit in pretty much every meeting I go to, so I get it. Okay, I'm not hearing any other hopes. This isn't the only option and opportunity you'll have to contribute hopes, so if you do think of some, please let me know. I wanted to I know my purpose today is to talk about the Innocence Project and some of our work. I also just want to specifically say that Innocence Project work doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? And my biggest aspiration, and maybe I should have put this on my hope slide before, is to dispel of the notion that wrongful convictions happen by accident. They are in fact a byproduct of an unjust system, and they're by design that they happen. It's not just like a whoopsie kind of thing. We've seen nationwide over 4,000 wrongful convictions that we know of. There's certainly many, many more. So I just I want to set that context and enter with that perspective. We may or may not agree on that, and that's totally fair and reasonable. Let's chat more about that. So to get y'all involved, I would love if you would be willing to chat with somebody in your vicinity. It doesn't have to be the person next to you. It can be the person in front of you, behind you, whatever. Where did you first learn about the criminal legal system, and from whom specifically? If you're oh, I don't know, maybe that's a moment of quiet reflection, but let's just take a couple of minutes to chat with somebody adjacent to you about this specific piece. So go forth. I will call you back when it's
Thank you.
minute. Take about one more minute. We'll come back together for a second. So one more minute. Okay, everyone, I'm gonna just say that was a minute. I wasn't keeping track of that last minute, but it felt like a minute-ish. So thank you so much. I wasn't expecting the amount of energy that y'all have. So I will try and raise mine to meet y'all's. Also, though, I'm used to law students who you may or may not expect. Some of them incredibly passionate, incredibly excited to talk about stuff like this. Others have had most of their energy drained from them. Law school is just kind of brutal. And so thank you for an incredibly lively first question. If you had fun with that one, you're gonna love the follow-up question, which is, what role did your social identities, and I list a few, there's a bunch of other dimensions to consider, but I have race, class, gender, sexual orientation, disability, and more, play in learning about the legal system. And maybe this one feels a smidge more difficult to pinpoint for you. For the sake of role modeling, I will contribute just a little bit in this regard. So for me, when I think of how my social identities informed my familiarity with the legal system, and again, specifically, I think a lot of people refer to the criminal legal system as the criminal justice system. I think, and maybe you all have found this in some of your learnings and stuff, generally, the innocence sphere is moving more so towards considering it just the criminal legal system as opposed to the criminal justice system. There's some implications to that and some considerations around the word justice that you all have been learning tons about. But so my entry point into all of this started when I was very young. My dad was actually a cop in Racine County. And so, he worked for the sheriff's department there. And so I got a very specific vantage point and learning opportunity, parentheses derogatory, about what the legal system was, from the vantage point of somebody whose job it was to enforce pretty arbitrary laws, in particular, enforcing them at the detriment of communities of color more often than not. So he would come home and curious child me would be like, how was work, and he'd be like, oh yeah, I don't know, pretty tough day, had this robbery situation thing. And it was always really apparent, in hindsight, the race of the people involved. If the race wasn't mentioned, almost certainly they were white. If the race was mentioned, it was always certainly to denote that they weren't white. And so that was a really particular way, that was a really particular way to learn about the legal system. And so that informed some of mine. So that was me role modeling this. I would love for you all to embark on a similar conversation or introspection for yourselves. And then after this question, we'll take 3 or 4 minutes for you to chat again. And then following that, we'll come back together. And I would love to hear from just a couple people. I'll set the bar low at 2. But who knows, maybe we exceed that. So cool. Any questions at this point? Okay, great. Go forth again. Thank you. Take about 1 more minute, just 1 more minute. Okay, everyone, I think we'll come back together. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for embarking on that combo. I think something before we transition to the next slide, where I think I invite some group feedback, but I think for me, whenever I engage in a conversation like this, I like to pause afterward and just spend a quick second thinking about which of those identities listed, or maybe some others that I didn't consider. And again, I have race, class, gender, sexual orientation, disability, and more. Which of those were easier for me to talk about in relation to learning about the legal system, and which ones were harder for me to pinpoint how that informs my understanding of the legal system? And non-judgmentally, what might that reveal to us, or what might that be an opportunity for us to consider if perhaps race was really difficult for us to pinpoint, or class, or gender, or whatever. Maybe that's an opportunity to think through some stuff together or in a group in the future. And so, great. I had kind of primed you all for this a little bit before. Does anybody feel equipped to share out either of those previous two conversations? How'd that go for you? What are you thinking about? Anything? I would love to hear, ideally from like 2-ish people, but let's see what happens.
I was sharing my sister is dating a black guy, and they live in Mesa, Arizona, but he works in the prison system, and he is sometimes pulled over, and it's kind of obvious it's because of the color of his skin, but then he pulls out his ID, and then there's his badge, and they'll, oh, no problem, sir, continue on your way. But if he didn't have his badge,
Yeah.
it would be probably a whole different story.
Yeah, and I think that, like, for me, when I hear an example like that, I think of like some of the from one of our earlier slides of like embracing the nuance piece, like kind of makes me think of like how is it simultaneously true that especially in Arizona, where we know that they have super restrictive laws, or maybe you don't know if you haven't been to Arizona recently or kept up on it, but their laws permit stopping anyone just based off of like perceived difference around like racial identity and ethnicity, and they hide that within the like immigration piece, but so it leads to a lot of stops that in other contexts wouldn't probably be considered legal, but in Arizona they have this like umbrella that they can just say, well, like, you know, I don't know, like, we're just checking the immigration status of somebody, like that's what y'all want us to do. So how can it be simultaneously true to that example that like black folks are regularly endangered by the police? This law is coming into play that allows the police to pull this person over, and then also like the power of like one of those badges offering like an exception kind of piece, like, oh no, I'm not like the others, is like a very peculiar dynamic. So thank you for mentioning all of that. Is there another person? Oh yeah, please, yeah.
So going back to the first slide, as far as an introduction to the legal system, this is not real legal, but I was an adjudicator for unemployment.
Oh.
And, you know, brand new to this, and it just surprised me because my supervisor would say, no, Randy, you have to do this. You have to come to the conclusion and then find the evidence to support that conclusion. And I'm just, you know, when you said introduction and wrongful conviction, it's like, you know, how many times did I not gather all the evidence, and just the evidence that I needed to support my prejudgment or my conclusion based on the initial evidence. And I didn't know if you can speak to that in the Innocence Project, and if that's what you find a lot for wrongful convictions.
Yeah, so, thank you. Is the short version. The slightly longer version is that we do tend to find, in particular in cases where there's something, so like in a case where perhaps like a child has died, or in cases where maybe it involves some sort of like inappropriate relationship with a child. A lot of times people are looking for someone to be responsible for that, whether or not it's actually the case. Like anytime there's like a tragedy, people tend to go towards holding an individual responsible, whether or not that's correct. And so we see that repeated time and time again, in particular, and maybe this is something that y'all are familiar with. If not, I'm happy to chat a little bit more about this. But the emerging and continuing developments around shaken baby syndrome and abusive head trauma in cases. I see some head nods. the Wisconsin Innocence Project has been historically on the forefront of challenging the science behind shaken baby syndrome. You all are of an age that you should remember the like shaken baby syndrome like kind of panic of the like early 2000s. In the like maybe like 2005 to like 20, honestly like 2018 like window, so pretty recent. Many people were incarcerated as a result of, unfortunately, the death of a child. There are a lot of pieces that fed into that, but a lot of it was the narrative like, well, a kid has died, someone should be held responsible for that. How can we get to that conclusion?
Right.
And that is one of the, I can't imagine, there's many things about wrongful convictions that are heartbreaking to me, but I can't imagine losing a child that's important to me and then simultaneously being incarcerated for the death of that child. Just feels like a real double whammy that I don't wish upon anyone. So, yeah, thank you for that. Is there a world where we exceed to? No is fine, but if anybody else is dying to share, would love to hear from you. Oh, in the back, yeah.
Being a boomer and a male and white, I realize I'm very ignorant of all of this stuff. I mean, until this class, my wife is running this, one of the ones running this, so I put so much.
Sitting right there up there.
Just, I mean, all the aha things, and it's like, you're kidding things.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that, like, owning of, like, where you are in the process, and, like, I think, like, I put on my, like, social justice educator hat in this, like, immediate moment, and I say, like, it is like simultaneously not your fault that like those things, like these aha moments are coming to you at this point. Like there is systemic factors at play that have like kept that information from you. And also now that you know that there's like information out there, right? Like what responsibility do we have to continue to like seek it? Yeah, so I appreciate that. We've already exceeded 2, which and hit 3, but my wildest dream would be like 4. But we don't. I mean, this isn't about me, so we very much don't have to. But if somebody's like, I got some thoughts, would love to hear. Oh yeah, please.
Well, we have 2 grandchildren who are of mixed race, and in our family, it's been really pronounced that we have 10 grandchildren, 8 of whom look like us, and 2 who have color. And when we talk about, now they're teenagers, they're driving, and we have had to do different kinds of education. Now that doesn't mean that no matter what color you are, that you should be respectful if you get stopped and all of those things. But it's a different education for the teenagers who are of color, because they know, and their father has been very good about saying, you get pulled over, you don't talk back, you put your hands on the wheel right here and don't move them. I mean, he's been very specific about, so it's a different kind of thing for different families.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I think that my understanding as a white person who's like adjacent to and involved in a lot of this work is that that's a similar conversation in communities of color across not just driving, right, but like all sorts of various facets where people might come into contact with authority generally, but almost certainly police and policing. You had your hand up in the front too.
Yeah, my sister and her significant other are friends with a gentleman that he's retired now, but he worked in the LaPont Correctional Facility for a long time as a guard, and he saw a turn for the worse in about the mid-80s, you know, when they were really cracking down on clean sweeping the streets and really going to the neighborhoods that they considered were crying out. It was usually people of color. And it's kind of like in Jared's book where he saw a lot of corruption, guards bringing things from the outside and becoming profiteers to get access to prisoners, stuff they weren't necessarily supposed to have from the outside, or guards maybe co-conspiring, like when you had a guy like Jared Adams who was looking for some social justice and trying to learn while he was in the prison system. They were the rebel rousers, so the guards were actually looking for a reason to find them at fault of something in the prison handbook. And we saw that, and it wasn't just guys like him, there are hundreds of guys like him, and so he couldn't wait to retire. He was like, you know, I've been in the system for so long, I don't know what to do with myself, but it bothered him. He retired very bothered by what he saw for about the last decade of his life.
Yeah.
He saw it get worse.
Yeah, and I think that like some pieces that I'll pull out from that example, I cannot believe that we met and exceeded my 2, we hit 5, so this is an incredible morning. But I would say a couple of pieces that I wanted to like highlight from your anecdote was, well, first, thank you for looping Jared's book back in. Yeah, incredibly helpful and super helpful reminder. I think mid-80s, right, like we can track that as it relates to the mass expansion of the prison industrial complex, right? Like we know that laws expanded, particularly cracking down on drugs. The war on drugs really ramped up in the mid-80s and incarcerated tens of thousands of people who frankly wouldn't have been ensnared in the system otherwise. And so interesting that it kind of tracks like, oh, mid-80s, it like got a little wild. I would also offer, have you all been tracking the news around Waupun Correctional Institution from this? Okay, cool. Yeah, cool. So the super short version, in case people are like, no, I am not familiar. The warden was arrested, charged. There had been a string of people who had died at that institution. I actually took a tour of Waupun this past summer. It was like 2 weeks after their warden had been arrested, so it was a really particular vibe in there. Yes, conditions continue to be deplorable at best. And yeah, I don't know how else to describe it other than it was like actively haunting. Like I think I still like think about how bad it was in there. And so, amazing. Not that, but y'all's participation, amazing. Let's move forward. If you were like, ooh, I really wanted to share some stuff, there will be times coming up. So I wanted to just provide a little bit of lore about myself, just to kind of give a little bit more background. I already said I work for the Remington Center and the Wisconsin Innocence Project. I've been in this role for about 6.5 years somehow. I grew up in southeastern Wisconsin, so if that's familiar to you all, great solidarity and shared experience in that. I also, on the side of doing all of this Innocence Project stuff, work as a social justice educator, and so generally around topics of race and gender and class. And so a real 2-for-1 kind of situation for you all today, that you get an Innocence Project person and also somebody who's kind of got a background in social justice education. I also put the question up of like, why should we care what you have to say about this? In case you're curious why you should care. I think the short answer is you don't have to. This is an opportunity for you to like hear some perspectives of somebody whose day job is working within the innocence realm. But you can take or leave that, you know, like no pressure, no stress. Cool, let's click that. I wanted to give you all just like a brief history of the Wisconsin Innocence Project. This text is super small. You're like, I can't read that. That's fair. I wouldn't be able to either. My vision is atrocious. But since I'm so close, I can read it. We were founded in 1998, making us the third oldest project in the country. Don't ask me who the other two are. One is definitively the New York Innocence Project. That number two, though, real pesky. I don't actually know that. But so we're a clinic in the law school that teaches law students while simultaneously trying to reform the criminal legal system. That does make things a little bit complicated from time to time to have students be driving a lot of these cases. As you might expect, students come in on a particular case sometimes with the similar pieces of like, I know this person's innocent, therefore like how do we get to that conclusion? And that's sometimes not that helpful and leads to some tough conversations along the way. But so students are fundamental to what we're doing. We take about 12 law students a year. So our staffing is currently 2 co-directors who send their regards. They wish that they could have been here, but both of them are out of town at a conference. It's 2 co-directors, an intake person who kind of helps evaluate the cases at a preliminary stage, and then me. And so my role in particular with the project is helping the students think through oftentimes what is their first interaction with the prison system, helping them conceptualize like what other pieces might be at play in their cases from like a systemic analysis. So other opportunities for us to build stronger relationships with our clients, if we have a stronger like race or class analysis of what their life looked like, oftentimes yes. And so that's a big part of where I come in. And so there's that. I did put in our 26 years, I think that's the math, 27 years of existing, we've freed or exonerated about 35 people. That ends up being a little bit of an undercount because there are a number of people who are like, who we had to like swear to secrecy on, that like they were released, but we're not permitted to talk about them as a stipulation by the district attorney in that specific case, which is pretty tough, because in theory we would love to like share all of the ways that this case manifested in like an outcome that was unjust, and also the difference between that and getting out was having this secrecy. And so obviously we're trying to respect the secrecy. I also wanted to introduce perhaps the language of like freed or exonerated. Oftentimes people are forced into taking what we call dark pleas to get themselves out of prison. So we believe in their innocence. We have evidence that supports their innocence. However, the district attorney in this case says, you know, like honestly, you could be successful, but what if instead of litigating this and therefore running the risk that the court says no, instead of litigating, what if we have this person plead to, so if we're being really honest, a lot of our clients are incarcerated for homicide, often first-degree intentional homicide. And so instead of first-degree intentional homicide, what if we have them plead to like second-degree reckless homicide, and then we can just give them time served and they can get out next week. And so we have to take that to our clients and say, here are the pros and cons, you have to make this decision. One results in you still having a felony conviction on your record for something you didn't do. The other is we can litigate it and see what happens, and you might not ever get out. And so it's quite the predicament that people find themselves in, and I don't know that there's not a singular right answer for any of those, obviously, right? Like, people are just weighing the confluence of all of the factors, and I have a slide coming up with some recent successes, including 2 people we recently got out and some info. But some of our clients got incarcerated as children, like active 15-year-old kids. And so now they're in their like mid-40s, and they're like, wouldn't it be cool to have a life? You know, like, I'll take that plea. And it's simultaneously very understandable. And also, as you all have probably studied, the impact of having a felony conviction on your record is immense, right? Like, you are precluded from a lot of places to live, job, background checks, and everybody's running a background check these days, which, safety, I guess, but does it do anything? I don't know. But so, like, inevitably that's gonna come up, and so it's a challenge. And then the final piece I wanted to highlight, we've had a number of shifting specializations as the Wisconsin Innocence Project. Oftentimes this has been informed by the expertise of whatever attorneys we have leading our project. I should have also said, I'm not an attorney. I don't know if that was clear. No judgment if any of you are attorneys, full support. I just, I don't have it in me. But so, when we first started, we did a lot of DNA litigation claims, testing DNA evidence that was untested, seeing the result, exonerating folks as a result of that. We briefly veered into arson investigations, which maybe you all know about this, but arson investigations are soft, like pseudoscience. And so oftentimes people are coming to definitive conclusions without any like actual scientific backing, but because people don't necessarily know enough about it, they're just like, cool, yeah. And by people, I mean the courts. The courts are accepting this wholesale and saying, cool, thank you for your expertise. And the result, pretty tough. Then we shifted into shaken baby syndrome and abusive head trauma cases, which was a really gnarly specialization, but a really important specialization to have. We were one of the only clinics in the country doing that. And so, yeah, that was a difficult time, but now here we are.
Is that why it took so long for, this person, what's your name? Jared to get recognized?
So Jared's case, so this is like a very specific intersection of my lived experiences. So I used to work at a university as like a dorm director, and so Jared's case involves, as you may recall, being at the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater, and then all of the like accompanying things that happened with that. All of these cases take years. There is no fast case. I think the quickest I've ever seen a case go from like application to the person leaving the prison was like 5 or 6 years. And that's when there's like DNA evidence that shows that this person was not responsible. And so the courts just take forever.
I just mean for the Wisconsin Project to take his case.
Oh,
Yeah.
so one fun, not so fun thing about us is that we've often passed on cases that ultimately were successful. I think partly that's due to like intake resources, and it's just like literally one person in a room kind of evaluating these cases at an early stage. And so hypothetically, if I'm remembering Jared's book correctly, he like wrote in a handful of times, each time kind of got like a placation / like, yeah, we'll check in, and that added years to the total. And so, yes, I think that like some of the logistics of some of these cases leads to extended periods of time. If it's DNA, if it's like, some of these cases, in particular ones that involve sexual assault, oftentimes involve, if there wasn't like any DNA in the case, it involves having to reach out to people who have been traumatized by this case, and we try and tread pretty carefully around that, with an equivalent amount of like attention being paid to the person who's like actively incarcerated for this. But it's just hard to receive a phone call from somebody who you don't know saying like, are you lying about that, right? Like that doesn't yield the results often that, and so yeah, all of those things like compound on top of each other and take the most time ever. Yeah, please.
Are those applications coming from prisoners themselves, or are they coming from their lawyer or somewhere else?
Incredible question. So we only receive applications directly from people themselves. And partly that's because we've had instances in the past where family members have completed an application for someone, but the person didn't actually want our assistance, and so it kind of, I wouldn't say wasted our time, but it was like, it kind of wasted our time. And so that's one of the reasons why we want an application directly from the person who's incarcerated. We also understand and recognize that some people's first language isn't English. We also know and recognize that people's literacy skills in prison are often not to the level that would be able to like fill out a pretty complex application. We're in the process of revising our application right now to be more accessible to people. And also, yeah, so that was a really long-winded answer to your pretty simple question. So I do have some additional pieces, and I was elated to see some of the racial disparity stuff. I just wanted to highlight general prison population things, and this is maybe old news to you all, but so I looked it up. As of January 31st of this year, the prison population was just over 23,000. The capacity of the Wisconsin state prison system is about 17,500. And so overcrowding already. The average age of somebody in prison is 41. I think when I tend to think of people incarcerated, I tend to think like 20s, 30s, I don't know, like 41 kind of stood out to me as like, oh, that's a little bit older than I thought. I also wanted to highlight, in case this was like salient to you all, the oldest person in prison right now is 98. The youngest is 18, but 98 really like stood out to me as well. I did include an unfun fact down here in the corner. Wisconsin allows people as young as 10 to be waived into adult court. So we've seen a few instances of that. They're not yet convicted, but you may have like been keeping up on like, there was like a case in Milwaukee with like a 10-year-old involving a video game and like killed a parent or something. I'm not trying to like make light of that, but it's just like, you get a little desensitized in my sphere. I wanted to highlight financial costs, about $38,000 per person annually to keep them incarcerated. I wanted to contrast that with, we spend about $10,000 a year per student in our public school system. I don't know, that felt salient to me. Overall, we spend over $1 billion incarcerating people in the state of Wisconsin every year. Yeah, big business, I heard somebody say. Yes, I think that is unfortunately the case. And I think oftentimes, and you brought up an acquaintance who was a guard in Waupun. I think that we also see these prisons situated in rural contexts more often than not. I mean, there's like one pretty centrally in Racine, right? Like, and I should also offer, almost entirely we work with folks who are at medium and maximum security prisons in the state. That's entirely informed just by like the type of crime that people were convicted of. There's any number of people who were convicted of crimes for things they didn't do, but received like pretty short sentences, short being like a few years. we're actually unable to help those people just based off of the longevity of how long everything takes. By the time we would get through their case, they would have been out. And so it's tough to be able to identify, like, oh, this person's probably innocent. And also there's nothing we can do in the time that it would take to do it. So unfortunately, they have to just sit in prison. Yeah, not great. But because everything takes so long, we almost exclusively work in the medium and maximum security prisons in the state. But so we see those prisons situated generally in a more rural context. We see them staffed by like local community members. It's honestly like one of the only like really lucrative jobs in like some of those areas. You get state benefits, you get like pretty solid pay. So it makes sense that like some of these communities become intertwined with the prisons in a way that doesn't necessarily yield liberatory outcomes, and instead deeply carceral problematic ones. Cool, I'm gonna hit my space bar.
Excuse me, did you work on Jarrett's case?
Oh, I did not, no. So Jarrett's case got wrapped up pre my arrival. I would also offer, it's been a hot minute since I read his book, so please excuse my knowledge. But does he talk about Dimitri Henley as well in that book?
Yes.
Yeah, I think a lot about Dimitri as someone who simultaneously was convicted of a crime he didn't do, and because of procedural bars in the state of Wisconsin, still has a conviction on his record. And so, not that it's like a one-for-one comparison, but it is like particularly stark for me to see Jarrett thriving, and I'm so happy to see that. That's incredible. And also, Mr. Henley's oftentimes struggling adjacent, right? Like it's just not as simple for him because of his felony conviction still. He has a hard time finding employment. He has a hard time finding a steady place to live. All because of some like non-facts-based procedural piece.
He was a co-conspirator with Jarrett. Okay.
Yeah. So it was my recollection. Jarrett, Dimitri, Rovan, I want to say, is the third person. Rovan was never charged, as far as I'm aware. Dimitri still has a felony conviction. Jarrett was exonerated. All for a crime that didn't happen. So, yeah. I've been kind of doom and gloom the last like 15 minutes, and so my apologies for that. I do want to highlight a couple of successes that we've had recently to say there is hope in some of this work. It's not the end all be all, but it is part of a broader effort of decarceration. And I wanted to highlight specifically Manuel, and these are real people, these are their real names. We have press pieces with this, so it's not like I'm giving you like secret info, but if it's fun for you to think that you're getting secret info, that's great too. So Manuel, when he was 15, received 2 life sentences for a crime he did not commit. We started working on his case in 2015, maybe? 2016 maybe, and he just got out in November. He took a dark plea, so he pled to, the example that I was using before, he pled to a second-degree reckless homicide charge for a crime he did not commit, so that he could have a chance at life on the outside. He had, and has a fiance that he wanted to like spend time with, you know? It's not unreasonable. We're still pursuing his exoneration now that he's out. The pathway just looks a little bit different. The other person I wanted to highlight, David Binns, and again, these are people from Wisconsin, right? Like, these are people from our communities. David served 25 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. He went in his mid-30s. He's now like 60. Came out in late September. He and his brother were both actually incarcerated for this crime. His brother also got out, which is great. But that was a DNA test, actually involving a 23andMe. So that's kind of the short version. So the short version is David and his brother Robert always maintained their innocence for this crime. There was somebody who actually committed this crime. Their relative completed a 23andMe. Their relative's info was put into a database of DNA info. It got flagged saying, hey, this is a potential match to the DNA that was used or that was found in the crime. The DNA never matched David or Robert, but they were still convicted of these crimes, largely based off of the testimony of somebody who said that David confessed while he was asleep. And so, which is so ludicrous to me, right? And yet, it resulted in a man being in prison for 25 years during what most people would consider the prime of his life, you know? Yeah, so I don't know, tread carefully with the 23andMes. I don't know. I don't know what my takeaway from that is, but I would also say we recently were granted a pretty sizable grant from the federal government to do some more DNA tests on past cases, which is amazing. It was actually humble brag, $1.6 million. Which in the land of DNA testing is actually not that much. The DNA tests are super expensive. But as you've probably been keeping up, our grant got frozen. And so we got unfrozen, and now we're kind of in a wait and see approach. So so we'd love to get working and stuff. Yes, so we just this week found we could start drawing it down a little, so we have been. But yes, oh yes, please.
So where do you get funded from?
Yeah, so our funding is almost entirely through the University of Wisconsin. We function a little bit differently since we're housed at a law school. There are a lot of Innocence Projects that function as 501c3s or just nonprofits. That has its benefits, including a lack of government oversight, which is kind of cool. All of our funding is steadily provided by, at this point, the University of Wisconsin.
Is some of that actually from the federal government then?
So, no, actually, none of our general operating funds are from the federal government, which is cool. We feel relatively isolated and secure in that regard. But our somewhat sizable federal grant that was specifically targeted at helping, in particular, people from racialized minority groups is now frozen. So, and frozen, soft frozen. Please, yeah.
I have another question about, and I don't know, I'm sure you can answer this. Does Wisconsin compensate people who have been wrongfully convicted?
I didn't, yes. The answer is technically yes. The slightly longer answer is that we actually have one of the oldest state statutes around compensation in the country, so you would think, yay, cool, we were ahead of our time. It kind of feels like we haven't updated it since then. People are eligible for a maximum of $25,000, no matter how long you were incarcerated. So for example, David, who was in for 25 years, he's eligible for $25,000. That is insufficient when considering the amount of money that he could have been making on the outside, loss of liberty, any number of like other factors. And also, as you all probably know as well as I do, $25,000 doesn't last that long out here in this context anymore. Yeah.
So when you do, they agree to the dark plea, do they get anything then?
No, usually no, yeah. And that's like, oftentimes part of it is saying you can't go up for the compensation. I am slightly obscuring the fact that you can ask for more money than $25,000. It goes to a vote by the state representatives. I mean, like, we can all, like, more or less guess, like, their interest in, like, compensating somebody who was incarcerated. So, so David is actually being, I don't think this is proprietary, he's being represented by Jarrett on a civil suit, which is cool. Thanks, Jarrett. They're asking for, I think, like, $2.5 million. They're optimistic. I don't know that I share that optimism, and like, I don't have to, you know, that's fine. I know we're so close to time, but I will just fly through these pieces. Challenges. So we, especially over the last couple of years, have been really successful in getting people out of prison, which is great, important work. Once they're out of prison, we've had a hard time making sure that they're like meaningfully supported outside of prison. And so part of that looks like helping them build community. Some of that looks like making sure that they have a stable place to live. Some of that looks like trying to find them a job when they haven't had any like work history outside of a prison, and most places aren't in, it's hard to get employed really anywhere right now. It's particularly hard if you have a felony conviction on your record or you have spent a lot of time in prison. So, you know, we're kind of combating that. Once people get out, we're coming to realize people have health needs, you know? People, I was just on the phone with David Thursday, and he told me that he wishes he never got out because it's harder for him out here than it was in there. And that, like, I started crying in my office because, I mean, it's one of those things that we kind of suspected he was feeling, but to hear him, like, articulate that was like a whole nother thing. And so, you know, keeping it going. I also think one of our challenges is not reinforcing a system that's like deeply harmful and problematic. And by that I mean, sometimes people point to exonerations as like a redeeming quality of the criminal legal system. They say like, oh cool, like we did that right. You know, like it was originally incorrect, but we got there. Like that's cool, we did it, this is justice. And I think we grapple with how to best simultaneously get people out of prison while also not falling into that narrative of, or allowing ourselves and our work to be used in that narrative. A couple quick things, whipping you. I have support local orgs doing important work, including Expo. If you all haven't connected with Expo, it's ex-incarcerated people organizing out of Milwaukee. They do great work, really, really great people. Just Dane, and here more locally, they do some cool stuff. And if you're looking to volunteer, LGBT Books to Prisoners is always looking for volunteers. They're located here in Madison. Cool org, really nice. Support financially where you can, particularly for reentry support for people. Happy to like have more conversations about that. And then 3, challenging our assumptions of who's deserving of care and who isn't. I think is just like, in a world where we all sometimes make qualifying pieces of like who's deserving of our sympathy and who isn't, a lot of people who aren't innocent are also deserving of our care after they get out. 4, this is a bit premature of me to like mention, but I thought this would be a good opportunity. I'm helping launch a parole-based project in the fall of 2025 that will train volunteers to work with people who are incarcerated to get them out on parole. It's kind of big and scary. Even saying it out loud, I'm like, I kind of regret saying it out loud. And if that's something that's of interest to you, let's be in touch. We'd love to talk more about that. Yeah, please.
I think the Wisconsin Innocence Project did a good to an excellent job with taking on Jarrett's case.
Yeah.
But, correct me if I'm wrong.
Please.
Stephen Avery, that was a big black eye for the Wisconsin Innocence Project, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
He was freed by the Wisconsin Innocence Project, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So, yes, I think like multiple things are true at the same time, right? And this isn't me trying to like shirk responsibility. I would say those were our previous directors in a previous approach to some of the work is my like preface, but I would also say I think it's probably simultaneously true that what happened with Stephen, if you believe in his current conviction, which I honestly don't know enough about the case to like have an opinion one way or the other, but he was convicted of killing Teresa Hallbach. He also was innocent of the crime that he was exonerated for. So he was incarcerated at the time when we got him out for a sexual assault that he was not part of. So we got him out related to that. He got out, and then the stuff involving Teresa Hallbach transpired. And so I think it's simultaneously true that that's not great. The Teresa Hallbach stuff, not great. And also, I think we would probably say we stand by getting him out of that conviction he didn't do. Like what happened after that is kind of part of like some of the support work that we're hoping to dedicate ourselves to more to ensure that people have the resources, have the care, have the community that doesn't result in maybe something like Teresa Hallbach. But that is maybe an unsatisfactory answer.
Well, I just, it's, I know they're trying, maybe somebody else can share that they're trying to free him from that conviction that he's been charged with.
Yeah.
Teresa Hallbach.
Yeah. Maybe Brendan Nasty. Yeah.
I think it's a travesty for what he did to bring his nephew into that crime.
Yeah, I think.
And I mean, he was probably coerced to admit his guilt, the nephew, but I thought, it's just, the whole thing was tragic, but for him to do that to his nephew.
Yeah.
And, he's still trying to fight his freedom, I think.
Yeah. So, yes, I don't honestly know enough about the case to have an opinion on it. I agree regarding the tragedy. I think there are people who believe in both of their innocence, and I don't individually know how to feel about that. But that's not as a representative of the Wisconsin Innocence Project, more just my own personal opinion about things. But I know that you all are trying to transition out of here for a sort of thing, so thank you so much for your time. If you want to chat, let me know.